Something unique about the van is that we did not want to cut a hole in our roof. We bought the van and we'd never done van camping, and we're thinking, what if we hate it? Let's not cut into the ceiling. And my husband had a great idea. Let's swap out this back window. If we change our minds, we can pop this out and put the factory glass right back in the window.
All right, I've had a couple follow-up questions about my rear window mounted ventilation fan. I did it.
It's not crazy. I love it. Whoa. Do you want to go ahead? No.
So it's like really back. Okay, so once you've got your window out, it's going to be this. You've got your glass and then this black plastic frame. These are glued together with more butyl. You can see it here. So you'll just use a pry bar or a flathead screwdriver to break away this black plastic frame. We need to transfer this to the plexiglass window for the proper spacing. You also want to clean out all of the butyl that's in this channel here. This is the same butyl that some of it will be stuck to the van door, some of it will be stuck to this channel. You can use a flathead screwdriver and just kind of clean it out here. You don't have to worry about scraping this because it's plastic. Like you have to worry about scraping paint off the back of the door, right, when you're scraping the butyl off of that surface. This one you don't really care as much. So a flathead screwdriver, you can run along here and peel that butyl right out of there. So once this frame is off, what you're going to want to do is take your window here and trace the outline of this window onto your piece of plexiglass. You're also going to want to mark where these hole locations are. That's how you're going to ensure your plexiglass, your frame, and the door all line up properly. Now, a note about cutting plexiglass. Your plexiglass is probably going to come with a protective like paper almost on it that's like stuck on one side or both sides. So you can draw on that fairly easily when you're doing the tracing. Then use the jigsaw, fine-tooth blade on high speed, and you should be able to cut it without any cracking. To cut out the inside shape where your fan is going to mount, obviously just set your fan on there and trace. Make sure you're tracing the inside mounting surface of the fan, not the whole frame of the fan, because then your fan's just going to fall through, right? I'll show you that in just a moment. And same thing, you can trace it out. Use a drill bit to drill a hole that you can get your jigsaw blade into and then start zipping around the corners. And you'll want to drill every corner. You won't be able to make a turn using the jigsaw in the plexiglass. When you're doing drilling in acrylic, don't push really hard. If you do that, you risk blowing out the back side of the acrylic. So let the drill do the work, use only gentle pressure, high speed, a sharp drill bit, and let it work its way all the way through. Don't push on it hard or it'll break. Now you use those holes, like I mentioned over here, to line up where this frame needs to go. So right through here is a hole. So that hole on the frame lines up with the hole in the plexiglass, and you can make sure when all four of those are lined up that you've got it seated properly on your new window. So that's how you get your frame lined up onto the acrylic, drilled, cut, and you've got your window ready to go. This is an old used one, obviously, but gives you the idea. All right, once you have this assembly together, I wanted more mounting locations, and I highly recommend doing this. Because these vans have been around for so long, they've come with lots of different window mounting configurations, and the doors will have more than one set of bolt holes that your factory configuration is using. So in my 2013 van, I only had to remove 4 bolts. That's what was holding my factory windows in. But there's holes in the door for 4 more bolts. And I want to use those to make sure I get a real nice tight fit, because this plexiglass isn't custom formed to my doors yet. So what you can do is set this assembly up in the door of your van, and then you'll see, the sheet metal is right here. You can put your 4 bolts in, or however many you've got on your van, and then take a drill bit and find that additional hole that's in your sheet metal on your door. Put the drill bit right in that hole, and then drill through your plastic frame and your plexiglass to give yourself more mounting locations. So I've got another one there, and another one over here, and then same thing on the top. And that ensures that this last couple of inches on your plexiglass is pulled in tight against the door, so you get a nice seal on the top and bottom of your window. I would wait to silicone these together permanently until the very end. So when you've got your frame lined up with the holes, don't silicone it yet. If you ever need to hold it together, just put your bolts through there and hand tighten them so you've got everything lined up. Don't actually go and silicone this together yet until we have everything ready. Having an 1/8 inch thick sheet of plexiglass isn't going to be sufficient for holding this fan. So the way this fan works, and probably most are very similar, this piece mounts from the outside coming in, and then your wall is here, and then you have this trim piece that mates up against this, and in a fairly thick wall that's in this case 1.5 inches thick, your fan is kind of recessed up into the ceiling, but you still have access to it. I didn't want to have to make up this ridiculous thickness, so I trimmed down this piece. I don't remember how thick it was at first actually, but I just used like a hacksaw, I think. And I just marked all the way around, and then I just cut it. You could also use like a Dremel or whatever works well to cut that down to as small as I could. And then when I line it up properly here with the little notch I made for the wires, there we go, it goes down and sits flush here. So you wouldn't want to go any more than that. So that's as low as you can possibly go, or as thin of a wall as you can possibly go. And it was still about 3/4 of an inch thick or so. So I thought, well, I'm not going to buy a 3/4 inch thick piece of plexiglass and try to make that bend and flex to the wall. So instead I made this very simple wooden frame. This is just some wood I had laying around. It's 3/4 of an inch thick, and I cut it on the table saw, or you can buy strips of wood even this size, and I just lined it up on top of this frame and then sanded the edges so that they lined up with the edges of this. So now with the wood piece in place, you have the external part of the fan. The plexiglass window would be here. Then I have this wood frame, then the top trim piece of the fan, and it looks something like this. I cut a little notch out so I could have the wires come in between the wood and this frame without crushing the wires. You'll want to pre-drill the holes in your plexiglass so the screws don't have to work through the plexiglass. If they're seeing resistance from the plexiglass, there's a good chance your plexiglass will fracture. So these holes need to be larger than the diameter of the threads on your screws. So your screws, in other words, can freely go in and out of these holes. Set your fan on here and mark all of the holes on the fan flange, and then pre-drill each of those holes. Alright, once you have all the pieces ready, this is pretty much what you're going to have, so I'll just show how it all gets assembled. The piece of plexiglass here, right, we have cut to the shape of the window. We have the plastic frame. We held that up in place in the van to get the additional hole holes pre-drilled. The plexiglass and the plastic frame have been siliconed together here. So the next thing that would be done is you would mount this into the van. So you hold this up, obviously, onto the rear door, put your bolts through here. Well, first you're going to have to put either silicone or butyl rope in this channel of the plastic frame, then put it on the door, put your bolts in, and tighten those a little bit more than hand tight, just to make sure it's up there in place, right? We don't want to tighten down on everything yet until all the pieces are in place. So once you have the plexiglass in place in your rear door, you're going to put a whole bunch of silicone around these holes. I have someone help you with this part, but you want to get your fan, make sure your cord is on the inside of your van. So now you've got your fan mounted up like that, and you're ready to put your screws in here. But what are the screws going to go into? You know, they're just going through the holes in your fan flange and the plexiglass. So on the inside of your van, here, is where you're going to put the wood frame. Now in my case, I spray painted black the outside of this wood frame so that it wouldn't just look like wood. We put the wood frame in place. Remember, this is all still up on your van. And now you can have someone hold this while the other person puts the screws in from the outside of the van into the wood. Once those screws are in, you're going to want to use some black or clear silicone on the heads of the screws to make sure no water is going to get in that way. Remember, we put silicone in between the flange and the plexiglass, but we also want to make sure no water is going to follow that screw into your wood and rot the wood. Now on the inside of your vehicle, you take this finishing trim piece, there we go, and there are 4 screws, 1 screw in each corner to secure this trim piece now onto the wood. And then mine came with these nice little white caps that you can push into the corners to cover up the screws. Now that everything is in place, now you can go back and tighten up those bolts from the inside and outside of the plexiglass and the inside of the van. And you want to make sure those clips are on here, oriented the right direction, so you can snap your door trim back on. But you want to be careful as you tighten these up, because this is a flat, flat surface here, but the door is curved, right? And so you're slowly flexing your plexiglass. You're going to do that gently. If you want, you can use some heat, a hair dryer on high, or a heat gun. They're $15 from Harbor Freight if you want a cheap one, just to add a little bit of heat to help the plexiglass form to that shape. Don't go crazy and torquing them down. You're going to split everything. So just go nice and slow, use some heat, or just a nice hot summer day, let it sit in the sun for a while so that it gets a little bit more flexible. It has to make up for those differences in curvature, going from a flat surface here to a curved surface over here. And once that's all nice and tight, you want to check, of course, that there's no gaps in your silicone on the top and bottom, especially of your window, or the sides, of course. And then if you need to, put some more silicone. You can kind of get the long nose of a silicone gun down here to add some more, just to make sure there's not going to be any water going down there. Now you've got the electrical connection here for your fan, and you can wire that down through the door trim or however you want, and you're all set.
This is my E350. So this is how I've got it set up. On the inside, beneath this, this insulation out, this is black landscaping fabric, so it's kind of a plastic fabric. In case moisture gets there, it's not going to absorb it. A layer of Reflectix, and then on the inside I have this gray fabric. It's a felt, and that matches my interior fairly well here. So that was my insulation. Here in the window you can see now just the black plexiglass that's here. This one runs off of 12 volts. You've got 2 speeds in, 3 speeds out, and the wires for it actually run down here behind inside of my door and come through. I fed them through this same, I don't know what you call these things, kind of a rubber accordion piece into the interior, and then the wires actually run down here and they run across. Here's a close-up of my wiring. Comes in through here. I put some protection around these wires And then they just come down through here, right into there, and then that feeds into this back panel. You can pull it from underneath the trim that's there. So I have the factory bolts for a window, at least for a fixed window, are 1, 2, 3, and 4. And in order to pull the plexiglass in tight on the bottom, I added additional stainless hardware here and here, and on the top, there and there. So on the outside, you probably saw earlier, but these are the factory bolts here. These are the stainless hardware with a large fender washer.